This isn't just a podcast, it's a movement. The Middle Ground Mike is fighting for truth and unity. Subscribe now or support us today. Links are in the notes. Stand with us. The extremes want us to believe that we're enemies, but we're not. The truth is, we're stuck on the same roads, in the same snowstorms, on the same tax bills, watching the same plant closures, school board meetings, and the state allowing massive rate hikes on our electricity and gas bills nonstop. So here's my ask. If this episode hit on something you're living, housing, crimes, jobs, identity, share it with one person who doesn't vote like you do. Hit follow, subscribe, Finding the Middle Sunday edition so you don't miss our upcoming conversations, including a huge deep dive interview with Sheriff Chris Swanson as he runs for governor, and drop a comment. What's your middle of Michigan right now? What's the one issue you're sick of screaming and you just don't want, and you want solutions? This is the Middle Ground Mike, Finding the Middle Sunday Local Edition, Michigan, reminding you we don't always agree, but we can always start by listening. Hello, everybody. Before we jump in, I want to flag something big that's coming. This week, I sat down with Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson, now officially one of the most talked about candidates for Michigan's 2026 governor race. And let me tell you, this wasn't one of those surface level politician interviews. We talked crime, accountability, mental health, policing, housing, and the EV layoffs, schools, and how Michigan can rebuild trust. All in a way, I promise you that you haven't heard from any other candidate yet. The interview drops soon on Rumble, YouTube, all your favorite podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple. And if you care about where Michigan is headed, Detroit, Flint, Lansing, Grand Rapids, you're going to want to hear this one. Follow now so you don't miss it. Subscribe if you're on YouTube. All right, Michigan, let's dig in. Let's talk a little bit about the EV layoffs, right? When you say Michigan, a lot of people still just picture a big car rolling off the line in Detroit, Amtrak, Lansing. The auto industry isn't just our past, it's still our economic backbone here. But right now, that backbone is under serious stress. In October, General Motors announced it would lay off around 1,700 workers across Michigan and Ohio as it slowed down electric vehicle production, including about 1,200 people at the all-electric Factory Zero plant in Detroit, Hamtramck. GM is cutting shifts and pausing some battery operations. EV demand isn't growing as fast as they expected, especially with the tax credits expiring and the regulatory environment has changed again, especially, in the Trump administration scaling back support for clean energy. At the same time, Zalt Energy, a battery company with operations in Midland and Auburn Hills, is shutting down both sites in the coming months. That's another 300 plus jobs gone in Michigan, a sector that was thought to help replace some of the old auto jobs. So here in the middle, we have to wrestle with this, right? One side, workers and unions saying, you told us EVs were the future. We were trained, we moved, we bought homes, and now we're being whiplashed. On the other side, climate and clean energy advocates warning that if the U.S. underinvests in EVs and batteries, countries like China will own the next generation of auto manufacturing and really hurt Detroit even more. And Michigan is going to become a museum and not a leader like it should. You can hear politics in the background. Some conservatives are taking a victory lap, saying CEVs were forced, the market rejected them. Some progressives are saying Trump's rollback of the EV support is literally costing Michiganders their jobs and letting China win. But if you're a line worker in Detroit or a battery engineer in Midland, you're not waking up thinking, which talking point do I line up behind? You're thinking, do I still have a paycheck next month? Can I keep my house? Can my kids stay in this school? That's the middle. That's where regular people live. These car companies knew that these tax credits were going to expire. The cost structure wasn't there to support them expiring. So now the demand's dropping because when the consumer goes to buy the car, they're not getting that tax credit up front. So it's making the price, out of this world. And on top of it, you got a slowing labor market. Certainty because of tariffs and certain trade policies, justified or not. Let's take a little bit of a deeper look. What's the transition plan for this? The government, federal and state, has poured billions into EV plants and battery facilities. And when the market shifts, what's the actual safety net? And the retraining for pipeline workers, not just a line in a campaign speech. Can we stop treating this as a green versus jobs question? Michigan needs both cleaner tech and stable work. If we frame this as care about the climate or care about workers, we all lose. Other countries proving you can do both with long-term planning. What's our plan B for the auto towns, right? You got places like Detroit, Warren, Flint, Pontiac, Downriver, Rouge. They've lived through the plant closures before, decimated all these communities, created crazy poverty because we didn't have a solid plan to counter things. Are we building a future that includes manufacturing and diversifying into healthcare, logistics, tech, trades? Or are we putting all our chips back on one square and calling it innovation? These people work hard for these companies. These are great people. They're smart. They fund everything in our communities with their tax dollars. The governments, they purchase things. We have to make sure that they're going to be okay in the long run. Are we honest about how fast regular people can keep up? Politicians love to talk about rapid transitions, but families don't transition that fast. Mortgages don't transition that fast. Kids in school definitely don't transition that fast. And if you're working this or watching, and you know someone or know someone that's hit hard by these EV layoffs or even at all, drop a comment below. What's the part that nobody's talking about? Because I promise you, people in DC love Michigan when it's time for a photo op with a hard hat. We need them to love Michigan when it's time to quietly fund retraining, unemployment extensions for these people that are getting caught up, local development that doesn't make headlines and doesn't abuse our tax dollars. Our tax dollars need to go to sustainable things that are going to create long-term jobs for our people, not overnight crashes. Let's talk a little bit about the crime now, right? Detroit crime, is it safer on paper? Let's pivot from jobs to safety, right? Because Detroit, Rick Snyder said, without a strong Detroit, you can't have a strong Michigan. And that feeds to everywhere else. All those cities are just as important to Detroit, but Detroit is a spotlight to the rest of the country and the world. But these two things, right? They decide whether people stay in the city. And if you look at the numbers, Detroit is safer today than it has been in decades. Preliminary data showed violent crime dropping hard in 2024, homicides falling to around 203, the lowest since the mid-1960s in Detroit. Non-fatal shootings, carjackings, and other violent offenses fell off too. In 2025 is continuing that trend, data says. Homicides, non-fatal shootings, and carjackings are down 15 to 30% compared to last year's third quarter. Overall crime is down around 10 to 15% to previous years. Mayor Mike Duggan and Police Chief Todd Bettison are pointing to a few big changes. There's more federal and state partners embedded with the DPD, especially prosecutors, a real-time crime center, and more data-driven policing. Community-driven based violence interruption helps, like programs funded under a new federal initiative that saw up to 80+% drops in homicide and shootings in certain zones when local groups responded quickly to potential retaliations. Those are real wins. You don't get numbers like that by accident. But here's where we find the middle. If you live in Detroit, the statistics don't always change how you feel walking to your car at night or waiting at a bus stop in the winter. You'll see vacant houses on your block, gunfire, stories of random violence that go viral override 100 quiet, peaceful days. So how do we talk about this honestly? Two truths can be held at the same time. Truth number one, Detroit has made real progress in violent crime, and people in city governments, nonprofits, block clubs, and churches should get the real credit for that. The trend is going the right way. Truth number two, for families who have lost loved ones who still hear gunshots, a 15% drop doesn't comfort them because the violence is not evenly distributed. Some neighborhoods feel like they're in a different city entirely. But the conversation we should be having is, are we doubling down on what's working? Especially community-led violence interruption, youth programs, mental health support, instead of just adding more sirens and prisons. Are we transparent about the numbers? There's a lot of rumors that we're not. What do you do if we're not transparent? You got to publish them. They got to be right and real. Charlie LaDuff has brought that up. But breaking them down by neighborhood, letting residents see what's really happening and not just hear it in a press conference, I think we can do that. But here's the middle ground challenge. We don't have to choose between everything is a war zone and everything is fine, stop complaining. We can say we are safer than we were and we're not where we need to be yet, and we're going to continue getting better and showing America an example of how to build a post-industrial city for the long haul. If you're watching from Detroit, I'd love to know, do you feel the drop in crime in your day-to-day life? Let me know your neighborhood in the comments if you're comfortable. If not, no doxing, no harm, no foul, and how safe it feels compared to 5 years ago. Let's move on to a little bit housing and evictions, cheap, but not for you, right? On Detroit, on paper, Detroit's one of the cheaper cities. In paper, Michigan is one of the more affordable states, about middle of the pack to pretty affordable. At least when I talk to people from around the country, it seems very, very affordable to me. But we're only one of two major metro areas where buying a home is actually cheaper than renting, thanks to low sale prices compared to other cities. But if you're at the bottom of the income scale, whether you're in Detroit, Metro Detroit, Lansing, Grand Rapids, it still doesn't feel cheap at all. A report this year has found, especially in Detroit and other inner city areas, median housing costs eat up about 41% of the typical household income before utilities. For the lowest income families, and any unexpected expense, a car repair, medical bill can knock them into eviction and homelessness. And that is not acceptable. statewide has a massive gap. There are only 39 affordable rental homes for every 100 low-income households. The state would need to create about 185,000 more deeply affordable rentals just to catch up. Do we go after private equity owning too much property? Because that leads into evictions are still a crisis. A recent look at 2025 trends highlights that. Even with some local protections, eviction filings remain stubborn, and housing costs keep rising as pandemic era protections fade. Let's look a bit at Detroit, because Detroit, these are very similar when you look around the state, right? The city has been touting right to counsel efforts and tenant protections. Activists are pushing for housing justice, more affordable units, anti-eviction policies, and a plan that centers residents rather than out-of-state developers. At the same time, big projects like District Detroit got hundreds of millions of dollars in tax incentives, partly because they promised affordable housing and then turned around and scaled back those affordable units while they took the tax dollars from the local city of Detroit and the state of Michigan. And it's happened in plenty of our other major communities as well. Cutting an entire building of affordable apartments and shrinking the overall commitment. So here's the middle. We can appreciate investment in the new buildings without pretending that gentrification and displacement aren't happening or what the issue is with them, right? We can go Detroit without writing off the people who stuck it out through the bankruptcy. If you're listing in a neighborhood, welcome the outsiders in, but we also shouldn't be forgetting about you because you've seen some of your homes demolished and the proposal end. You've probably noticed some of the lots are rehabbed and sold. Some become community gardens. Some just sit there, another empty patch where a family used to live and backfilled with toxic dirt. I'd argue it's, what does this middle ground housing agenda look like in Michigan? Build to protect deeply affordable housing, not just force workforce housing that still prices out the poorest. Fund eviction prevention like we fund stadiums. The cost of keeping people housed is usually lower than the cost of shelter, policing, and ER visits after they're out on the street. So it's an option we can look at that would help show more money for the state budget to be put in other areas or cut existing taxes. Tie tax breaks to real enforcement. If developers promise affordable units in exchange for public dollars, then quietly reduce that commitment later. There should be consequences, not just updated agreements, because it rips all the taxpayers off. If you can put together an $800 million private-public package for a shiny project in downtown Detroit or any kind of project in any of our major cities, why is it so hard to fully fund legal aid and rental support for people in their neighborhoods that are going to shop at some of these smaller shops with the money that they have? That's not radical. That's just trying to be common sense. We don't have to raise taxes to take care of our people. We just have to use the money better. The governor's race in Michigan, we're a bellwether state. We are purple all the way. And again, I will stress how proud I am of the state with Republicans and Democrats able to come together, compromise, and get things done so that the citizens of the state didn't really suffer. Washington, you could take a lesson from Lansing. Let's zoom out of the politics a little bit that are shaping all this. In 2026, Michigan is electing a new governor. Whitmer can't run again due to the 2-term limit. The field to replace her is stacked. Joycelyn Benson, the current Secretary of State, she comes with a lot of controversy, but she also comes with a lot of experience. Garland Gilchrist, the Lieutenant Governor. Chris Swanson, the Genesee County Sheriff you've heard me talk about, and who is going to be coming on our show next Sunday, November 30th, for an exclusive sit-down interview with the Middle Ground Mike. And there's plenty of others like Marnie Sawicki. And on the Republican side, you've got John James, a current congressman, a former Senate candidate. Encourage him to come on this show. Mike Cox, former Attorney General. Where are you at, buddy? Tom Leonard, and tons of others. But here's where it gets really crazy. There's a plot twist, something that we don't see in Michigan very often. Mike Duggan, the mayor of Detroit, is running as an independent, and he's raised millions. And the polls show him pulling a serious chunk of voters from both parties. Because, like a lot of people, even if you don't like Mike Duggan, his message is, let's get rid of the division. Both parties attacking their own when they don't march to the beat of the drum that they're told to. But recent polling can say this is a three-way race, with support bouncing between Benson, James, Swanson, Duggan, and a big slice of the voters still undecided. Why does this matter beyond the drama? Because Michigan is once again treated as a national bellwether for the presidential race, for control of the Senate, for future of both parties in the Midwest. Political scientists have been pointing out all year Michigan's political landscape looks like a mini USA. Urban versus rural, union versus management, diverse suburbs, and razor-thin margins that can swing in either direction. But here's what I want to talk about. Let's bring it back to the middle where both sides present ideas that we can compromise on, or hey, if the other side's got a great idea, we roll with that. But you're going to be bombarded, absolutely flooded with messages over the next year that say, if the other side wins in Michigan, democracy is over forever. Or if this candidate doesn't win, your way of life is gone. Don't let them fearmonger you, no matter who it is, even if it's your favorite candidate. Don't let them fearmonger you. You decide your future in the end. Don't let them fearmonger you. But what if instead we asked every candidate, Democrat, Republican, Independent, what's your plan for EV whiplash? How are you going to handle the layoffs? No slogans. We want some actual policy. How will you keep building on Detroit's crime progress without criminalizing poverty? Are you going to be able to maintain those numbers? Are those numbers real? And are you going to look into it if they're not? Are you protecting funding for community violence prevention, mental health, and reentry? Or is it all just more punishment? What's your housing plan beyond more development? Or how are you going to ensure that development actually happens with things that won't make people sick, like in some of the vacant lots in Detroit where they have contaminated dirt? We'll get into that. But Michigan doesn't need a governor who can own the other side on cable news. We already have plenty of that. We need a governor who can sit down with the auto workers, students, landlords, tenants, cops, and activists and say, here's what can actually get done in 4 years. Here's what I need you to hold me accountable on. And as we head into these debates, ads, yard signs, I'm going to keep asking the same thing on this show. Who is talking to the middle? Because remember, independents account for about 40% of the country now. So are you talking to the middle? We're going to keep receipts, not the mushy, I believe in nothing middle, but the messy middle, where people want safe streets, affordable housing, good jobs, and basic respect, regardless of party, and being able to keep their paycheck without you coming to them to repave a street and saying, I need more money, and then come back 10 years later saying, I need more money now, even though your taxes never rolled back after they paid for the previous road. And yes, when that Chris Winson interview drops, we'll be talking about exactly this, how to keep Michigan safe, united, and sane going into 2026 and beyond. Great guy, super positive, right? Protests, the surveillance and identity in Michigan. We can't talk about Michigan in this year without talking about how the Middle East conflict has landed here, not just on cable news, but in Ann Arbor and Dearborn. Back in June, reporting revealed that University of Michigan hired undercover investigators from a Detroit-based security firm to surveil pro-Palestinian student activists. These investigators allegedly followed students, secretly recorded them, staged incidents, and even harassed them, all in the name of monitoring Gaza-related protests on and off campus. The university spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on this and over $3 million, supposedly, on security and consultants tied to disciplinary action against students. Think about that. Instead of simply using campus police, maybe beefing it up a little bit, and clear protest rules, they went covert surveillance contractors that caused chaos on purpose. Is it true or not true? Let me know. Creating even if it's not completely true, that environment that creates a chilling effect on student speech, whether you agree with the protesters or not. Then in Dearborn, the police department floated a design for a uniform patch with Arabic lettering alongside English, meant to reflect the city's large Middle Eastern and North African population. The internet reaction? Absolutely a meltdown. Right-wing influencers going crazy, saying the city's promoting Sharia law. The department quickly pulled the mock-up. The mayor had to clarify it was just a draft and not even an official proposal. This is what happens when sometimes we all jump the gun. But both of these stories have something in common. They ask, who is really welcome in Michigan? My answer, everybody who's going to contribute. The middle isn't easy, but it's necessary on this. We can defend free speech and the right to protest without endorsing every slogan or chant. We can protect Jewish and Muslim communities from hate and harassment at the same time. We can question state and university surveillance powers without pretending there are no safety concerns at all and that there wasn't good intent behind their actions. Michigan is one of the most diverse states in the country. Dearborn is home to one of the largest Muslim communities in the nation. Detroit and Ann Arbor have the long histories of activism, civil rights, anti-war movements, and labor struggles. That's part of our identity as a state. If we start turning every disagreement into a security crisis, we're going to lose something vital. So here's what finding the middle looks like to me on this. Demand transparency. Call out bad faith from both extremes. If someone uses this moment to spread Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, or conspiracy theories about takeovers without any actual proof beyond vague messages, we're going to say no. If you supposedly have that, show proof beyond vague text messages and random things. If someone dismisses real fears about hate crimes or erases the other community's pain, We say no to that too. We can be a state that figures this out like adults, or we can be a state that lets the national media turn us into a clickbait battlefield, which we are better than. I'd rather we choose the first option. So tonight we really hit on a lot, and this is a lot more a charge show and direct, not as much as off the cuff as normal. But we did cover the EV layoffs shaking the auto industry and families in Detroit to Midland, crime going down on paper while some neighborhoods still don't feel safe yet, and investigators like Charlie LaDuff have found that some of those numbers may not be accurate. A housing market that's cheap if you look at averages and brutal if you're on the poor edge of eviction. A 2026 governor's race that could reshape both parties, with Michigan once playing a huge national bellwether. Again, Michigan is going to be purple. I'm telling you, it's going to be purple. And protest surveillance identity battles that are testing what belonging really means in this state. And here's what ties this all together. Michigan is not just a headline for us, it's home. And it's home for auto workers, students, Arab, Muslims, Jews, Christians, all across the state. For working class families up north, in the city, for new immigrants, for longtime union members, and for lifelong small business owners and corporations who have really helped do the right thing. The extremes want us to believe that we're enemies, but we're not. The truth is, we're stuck on the same roads, in the same snowstorms, on the same tax bills, watching the same plant closures, school board meetings, and the state allowing massive rate hikes on our electricity and gas bills nonstop. So here's my ask. If this episode hit on something you're living, housing, crimes, jobs, identity, share it with one person who doesn't vote like you do. Hit follow, subscribe, Finding the Middle Sunday edition so you don't miss our upcoming conversations, including a huge deep dive interview with Sheriff Chris Swanson as he runs for governor, and drop a comment. What's your middle of Michigan right now? What's the one issue you're sick of screaming and you just don't want, and you want solutions? This is the Middle Ground Mike, Finding the Middle Sunday Local Edition, Michigan, reminding you we don't always agree, but we can always start by listening. I'm Joe. Thanks for spending your Sunday with me. No left, no right, just forward, real conversations. See you next time.